virus, they each take different arguments. There's no way to memorize them all. If you're using the syscall provider and you want to know what arg0 is and arg1 is and arg2 is, man-s2, the name of the system call, and read the man page. Or ask the developer who sits behind you that really annoys you, but hell, you need him there. Okay. So what I'm doing is, so I'm basically looking at the number of bytes that I'm reading and writing over the network. But I'm doing something else cool too. Here's another probe, tick probe, 1 second. So every second, I'm going to print the data that I'm collecting up here, and then I'm going to truncate it. So what this is basically, this is a DTrace command line that behaves kind of like a Unix command. I'm saying, give me data at 1 second intervals. This is giving me throughput at 1 second intervals. So I could see that every second I'm writing about 34 megabytes over the network, and I'm reading 1.8 gigabytes. So what does that tell me? Either I've got like a super fast network link, or I was probably using the loopback provider and not actually going out over the wire. Because 1.8 gigabytes per second is really, really good over, okay. Anyway, so again, this is an example of being able to use DTrace to capture meaningful performance data in terms of getting a handle on the load that's running on your machine. In this case, I'm looking at network bytes being read and written per second. That's extremely useful information, not only in terms of what my workload is doing, but when I start going to battle with the network guys, and they tell me that, hey, the network's only 10% utilized, and I've got data that says, no, I'm actually, if that's a 10 gigabit link, I'm actually generating a lot more data than that. And writing DTrace scripts and command lines that generate data at regular intervals. Because interval data, especially when you're looking at performance data, interval data is very, very useful. It's much more useful than aggregated data over time. Per second data is really what you care about when you're looking at throughput. And here's the previous example in a script. And I'm seriously running out of time here. In fact, Joy's probably going to run in and start going through that. So let me hit a couple more highlights for you. Okay, sysinfo. Sysinfo is a provider. It's a very useful provider to know about because it enables you to use DTrace to get statistics on a whole bunch of different system-wide events, right? So if you've used, again, SAR or MPStat or any number of different tools to look at systems, a lot of these events are going to make sense to you. But the sysinfo provider allows us to track things like context switches, write characters, write system calls, read characters, cross calls, idle thread, mutex locks, semaphore operations, blah 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 blah. I'm not going to go through all of them, but this is basically a way of saying I have this whole list here. Actually, let me see if I can. So if you ever want to just list the probes, dtrace-l-p sysinfo. So remember, provider, module, function, name. I really only care about the provider and the name. I want these are probes that have meaningful, in some cases, meaningful names to me. And these are all the names of these are all the events I can track with the sysinfo provider. So I can look at, again, module loads, context switches, traps, cross calls, reads, forks, on and on and on it goes. So I can use DTrace simply to collect some high-level information. So here all I did is say, turn on every probe, right? All my fields are blank. Turn on every probe that the sysinfo provider manages and count them up, aggregating on the probe name, and then give it to me in 1 second intervals. So here I can see that every second I'm doing a lot of context switches, doing a lot of write characters, a lot of write system calls, a lot of read characters, a lot of read system calls. So, which kind of makes sense based on the previous data. Now, whoops. So now, once again, this is another example of, I looked at that sysinfo data. I want to take a look at read and write system calls. Now here you'll notice I did something a little different. You see the asterisk in the probe name? DTrace gives you the ability to do wildcard matching on probe names. So let's say I want to look at reads and writes. Well, Unix implements a variety of different read and write system calls. There's read, there's pread, there's write, there's pwrite. I might want to wildcard them to make sure I capture all occurrences of the system call. So I can use this wildcard mechanism that I know from being a shell user to actually say, to ask DTrace to match all occurrences of any string that ends in READ or any string that ends in write. Very powerful mechanism, just be careful when you use it in production, because you may end up matching a boatload of probes and get that little probe effect we talked about earlier. So here I'm just seeing which reads and writes I'm executing, and I can see it's mostly read and write with a relatively small number of preads and pwrites. Here I'm saying, for those reads and writes again, what file systems am I hitting? This is kind of cool, right? This is a variation on what we did before. I know I'm doing a lot of reads and writes. I figured that out. Am I doing file system reads and writes? Am I doing network reads and writes? Am I doing raw device reads and writes? At a high level, where are all those reads and writes going? Well, I can aggregate on this variable that you'll read about. I'm sorry, I don't have time to explain it to you. If after 8 you want to stay and ask me these questions that I told you I would explain to you and I never did, then I'll be happy to give you the answer. I get a high level and I can see that, look, most of my reads and writes are the socket file system, which is consistent with the previous example. I did do some writes to a UFS, and I'm reading /proc in some cases. Get a good high-level picture there. Okay. Another example. I run npstat. You guys have seen this standard Solaris tool for looking at CPU statistics. No, I'm not going to do this one. Because as soon as I get into cross calls, we rat hole big time. And I'm seriously running out of time, so I want to pull out a couple more highlights for you. Once we wrap up at 8, if you guys want to hang around, I can talk about this stuff all night, which you probably figured out by now. So, observing memory. Memory is interesting to look at. Really cool provider is the VM info provider, virtual memory info. If I'm running VM info or I'm looking at SAR data, I got page faults, page ins, page outs, just all sorts of virtual memory, memory type activity going on my machine. I want to see where it's coming from. No, I don't want to do this. I have an example that I do want to do. Yeah, tracking VM events. Here it is. So, this is just a little bit higher level. I'm going to use the VM info provider. This is a D script, by the way. So you can see, like any script you run on a Unix machine, it always begins with bang exclamation point, and then the name of the interpreter, which in this case is DTrace. And I have 2 probes in my script. Every probe that the VM info provider manages, and then I'm using the tick provider. So basically, I'm saying every time a VM info probe fires, and I'm lighting up all of them, then I'm going to count aggregate the name of the process, the probe function name, and the probe name. And then, once a second, I'm going to print out all the information. Now, I don't have time to go through all this, but suffice it to say, DTrace supports, among other things, a printf statement, which if you've used awk or C language before, you know what printf is. And printA is a special DTrace statement to print an aggregation. And you can format your output. So that means you can write these really cool DTrace scripts that give you output that looks like that. So you can actually collect data with DTrace, have it aligned with titles and columns and stuff that you can actually hand a manager, for example. Are there any managers in here? Anyway, so This is basically